Some rooms don't need chains. Just silence, a locked door, and a whisper that says, "You deserved this." Maya hadn't seen sunlight in weeks, months. Time dissolved into shadows here. The fan above spun with a dull hum, and water dripped somewhere behind the mold-stained wall. The smell of damp rot clung to her skin like shame. The room had no windows. It was small, with a single mattress and 4 damp walls that had learned how to listen. The door creaked only twice a day, once when he came in, and once when he left. There were no clocks, no calendars, only him. She didn't remember what his real name was. He'd told her once, but now he was just him. The man with eyes that never blinked. The man whose voice could coil around her like a rope. "You were nothing when I found you," he said, cupping her face with fingers that knew no mercy. "Now you belong to someone. To me." She wanted to fight. She had, in the beginning. But every punch she threw became a whisper. Every scream dissolved into dust. Now, she didn't scream. She just waited. Counted cracks on the wall. Folded herself into silence. Survival wasn't becoming invisible, but something was changing. It started 3 nights ago. A voice, not his. A soft, fragile echo from behind the walls. A woman's voice. Familiar, gentle, dangerous. "You're still in here, aren't you?" it said, almost tenderly. Maya froze, heart pounding. "I remember who you were before this, do you?" She wanted to laugh, or cry, or scream, but all she did was whisper one word into the dark. "Who are you?" No answer came, just silence. But for the first time in forever, Maya felt something she hadn't dared to feel. Curiosity. The voice didn't return the next night, or the night after, but it had left something behind, an itch under her skin. A thought she couldn't bury. "I remember who you were before this." Maya sat on the mattress, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the blank wall across from her. Before? There was no before. Only this room, only him. He came in that morning like he always did, carrying a tray of cold rice and boiled meat. She didn't look at him. She had learned the price of eye contact. But today, he paused longer than usual. "You're different," he said slowly, narrowing his eyes. "What are you hiding in that head of yours?" She didn't respond. He set the tray down hard, the clang of metal jarring her from her thoughts. His voice dropped. "Don't start thinking again, Maya. Thinking leads to hope. Hope leads to disobedience. And we both know what happens then." She nodded automatically, lips tight, but inside her, something rebelled, quietly, secretly. When he left, she didn't touch the food. She closed her eyes and tried to remember anything, a smell, a voice, a place, but it all came back fragmented, like pages torn from a book and thrown into the wind. That night, she whispered into the dark again, "Are you still there?" Silence. For a long, long time. "And then? You buried me." The voice was closer now, more vivid, almost inside her. Maya's skin went cold. "I had to," she said aloud before she could stop herself. "I had no choice." The voice laughed, sad, bitter. "Everyone has a choice. Even you." Her breath caught. She touched her chest, half expecting to find something moving underneath. Something old. Something waking up. From the corner of the room, the shadows seemed to pulse like they were listening. And for the first time in years, Maya didn't feel alone. The shadows watched her now, not with eyes, but with presence, with weight. Maya felt it pressing against her skin like humidity before a storm. Each breath she took felt stolen, but she didn't stop. That voice, the woman inside her, it was getting stronger. She began to whisper to it when he was gone, little things, things she never dared say aloud before. "I used to love the rain. I had a sister once, I think. I was going to be something." And every time she spoke, the walls seemed to bend inward, listening. The silence responded not with sound, but with feeling, like the room was remembering, 2. Then came the dream. She was back in a hallway, white, endless, cold. Her bare feet echoed on the tiles. Doors lined both sides, all shut, all silent, until one opened, and behind it, herself. But not like this. Not the hollow-eyed ghost she had become. This Maya stood tall, defiant, eyes blazing with fury and grief. "Why did you leave me in here?" the dream Maya demanded. "I didn't," she whispered, shaking her head. "You did? You let him erase me. You let him win." Tears spilled. "I was scared." "So am I," the other Maya said, "but I'm still fighting." Then the hallway trembled, and a shadow pulled her back, ripping her from the dream. She woke screaming. For the first time in years, she screamed. Footsteps thundered. The lock turned. He burst into the room. "What the hell is going on in here?" She stared at him, still trembling. He looked confused, almost afraid. Something in her eyes had changed. "You're slipping," she said quietly. He stepped back, uncertain, and Maya smiled. He didn't hit her that day, not because he didn't want to, but because something in her stare made his hand hesitate, just for a second. But it was enough for her to feel it. Power, tiny, flickering, but real. He muttered something under his breath, slammed the door, and locked it harder than usual. She heard him pace outside for a long time, breathing heavy, like prey realizing it might not be the predator anymore. Inside the room, Maya pressed her hands to the cold wall, closed her eyes. "I saw you again," she whispered. No response, until, "You're waking up." She flinched. The voice was clearer now, as if it wasn't just in her head anymore, but in the walls, the floor, the air itself. "You were never just a victim," the voice said. "You were a storm once." Maya's fingers dug into the cracks in the concrete. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. "Then why did I let this happen?" Silence. "Then, because you were broken, not dead." That night, Maya didn't sleep. Instead, she remembered flashes, blood on white sheets, screams that weren't hers, a door slamming, a hand reaching for her that didn't pull her away, but pushed her in. Memories she had buried so deep they'd grown roots. She saw herself at 17, drunk, disoriented, crying in the backseat of a car, a face in the dark, laughter that didn't match the pain. She saw the moment she stopped being Maya and became no one. "No," she whispered, pressing her palms to her ears. "I don't want to remember." But the voice inside her was relentless. "You have to. That's how we get out." And for the first time, she didn't resist. She remembered everything. She couldn't stop remembering. Memories bled into each other, jagged fragments of a life she had tried to erase, faces she had forgotten, places she didn't recognize, moments when she had chosen silence over survival. It was in the dark, in the stillness of the room, that she saw it most clearly. Her past wasn't some distant thing. It was alive. It was here with her. It was the thing that watched from the shadows, the thing that whispered in the night. "You've been hiding from yourself," the voice said, "but you can't hide forever." She wasn't sure if she was talking to the voice anymore, if it was even the voice of the woman or something deeper, something more ancient. Maya's fingers traced the edges of the mattress, the rough fabric digging into her skin. The room felt colder now, not because of the dampness, but because something inside her had shifted, something old, something dangerous. He came in, like he always did. His presence filled the room, like a storm creeping in on the horizon. "You've been quiet," he said, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. "You know what happens when you don't obey." Maya didn't look at him. She didn't have to. Her mind was elsewhere, unraveling in real time. She could hear the whispers in the walls, the faint murmurs of people who had once been there. She could feel them watching her, reaching for her, pulling her back from the edge. But she wasn't afraid anymore. "You think you own me," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence. "You think you can make me forget? But I remember. I remember everything." He froze. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, fear. Doubt. It was brief, gone before it could be real. But it was enough. "You should have never brought me here," Maya continued, her voice low, steady. "Because now I'm coming back." He lunged, but Maya didn't flinch. She felt. The room was silent for a long time after his attempt to silence her. Maya felt her pulse race, but it wasn't fear she felt anymore. It was power, the kind that only came when a person had nothing left to lose. He didn't speak, didn't move, but she could feel him there, waiting, watching. "You think you can break me?" Maya asked, her voice low and dangerous. "I was broken before I ever came here. What you've done, it's just the last piece. You didn't make me weak, you just made me remember." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Maya saw him as he truly was, a coward, a predator who thought his control was absolute. But control was an illusion, and Maya had learned the truth. "You're wrong," he finally spat, his voice thick with anger. "You'll never be free. Not from me. Not from this." "I'm already free," she replied. "You just don't see it." Something in him snapped. He grabbed her wrist, his grip tight, his nails digging into her skin. "You don't get to talk like that. You don't." But Maya didn't let him finish. She twisted her wrist out of his grasp. Stepping back, heart hammering in her chest. For the first time, she didn't feel like a victim. She didn't feel small. She felt alive. And with that, the room shifted. The shadows that had once seemed like walls, like confinement, now seemed like allies. The air, thick and oppressive, seemed too thin. The whispers from the walls were no longer faint. They were louder, more urgent. "You have the power to break the chains," the voice whispered again. This time, it wasn't a question. Maya turned, her eyes darting around the room, looking for the source of the voice, her mind spinning. How? How can I break this? But the answer was already inside her. The realization was simple, but terrifying. She didn't need to break out of the room. She needed to break the man, to take his control, his power, and turn it into her own. The door was locked, but the real prison was the man. It had always been him, and now he was the one trapped. Maya walked toward him, her eyes cold, her movements deliberate. She wasn't the girl who had been broken anymore. She wasn't the girl who had cowered in silence. She was the storm. She was the weapon, and the man would never see it coming. He didn't understand what was happening. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape, but the walls closed in on him. Maya could feel the shift in the air. The power she'd once felt from him was now like dust slipping through her fingers. "You think you can control me?" Maya said again, this time with a calmness that unnerved him. She stepped closer, slow, measured, watching him flinch. "You've always been afraid of me, haven't you?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. His silence was enough to confirm it. For years, he had manipulated her, twisted her into something small, something quiet. But now, with her eyes wide open, she could see the truth. He had been the one afraid, not of her body, but of her mind, of the power she had buried beneath layers of fear and submission. Her hand reached out, not to strike him, but to take his arm gently, but with an iron grip. "You're afraid of losing control. But you never had it in the first place," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "It was always mine." His breath hitched, his mouth opened, but no words came out. Maya pulled his arm toward the door, her eyes never leaving his. He didn't resist. He couldn't. The roles had reversed. He was the prey now. She was the predator. She reached for the door handle. The lock clicked, a sound that echoed through her bones, and the door swung open. But it wasn't freedom that lay beyond the threshold. It was a mirror. She stepped through, her heart pounding. The air was thick with dread, but not from him, from herself. The reflection, staring back at her, wasn't the face of the girl who had been broken. It wasn't the girl who had been afraid to breathe. It was the face of someone she didn't recognize, a woman hardened by years of violence, but also free from it. The chains were gone. The fear was gone. The girl was dead. And yet, she still felt the weight of what had happened. The scars inside her, the parts of her that would never be healed. She reached out to touch the glass, but it rippled like water, distorting her image. "Who are you now?" the voice asked. The woman's voice. The voice from the walls. Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to. She already knew. She wasn't who she had been, but she wasn't yet the woman she would become. For now, all she could do was survive, and make sure he never found her again. Maya ran. Through the door that wasn't there yesterday. Down a hallway that twisted like it had been waiting just for her. The walls pulsed like they were alive, whispering secrets in a language she didn't understand but somehow knew. Each step took her deeper, not into freedom, but into herself. Because this wasn't a place outside the world. This was inside her. The real room with no windows wasn't the one he locked her in. It was the cage she had built in her mind, brick by brick, every time she swallowed a scream. Every time she said "I'm fine" when she wasn't. And now she was inside it. Finally facing it. Behind her, his footsteps echoed closer, but slower. He wasn't running anymore. He was hunting. But she wasn't afraid. She stopped at the end of the hallway. A door, black, pulsing, waiting. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. Inside, the room was cold, empty, except for a single chair, and sitting in it, herself, younger, bruised, terrified, crying. Maya stepped forward, her throat tight. The girl looked up, eyes wide. "I left you here," Maya whispered. "I abandoned you." The girl didn't speak. Maya knelt beside her, took her hands. "You were never weak," she said. "You survived. And now, so will I." The girl dissolved gently, like ash in wind, and the room began to collapse. Cracks raced across the floor. The walls crumbled. Darkness surged. Behind her, he screamed her name. But Maya didn't look back. She stood, faced the storm, and walked through it. And this time, when she opened her eyes, there were windows. The light that poured through the windows wasn't warm. It was sterile, pale like the kind you'd find in a hospital room. Maya blinked against it, her body trembling, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar sensation of space. Real space, air, movement. She was lying on a thin mattress, clean sheets. Machines beeped softly beside her. There were voices in the distance, nurses, doctors. She tried to sit up, but her limbs felt heavy, disconnected. Her throat ached. Her mind buzzed like it was waking from a long, long dream. A woman entered the room, kind eyes, clipboard in hand. "You're safe now," she said gently. "You've been asleep for days." Maya stared at her, eyes wide. Where am I?" "You were found," a neighbor called when they heard screaming. "You were unconscious when they got to you." She paused, her voice dipping. "You've been through a lot." Maya turned her head. The room was real. The light was real. But the storm inside her hadn't passed. She remembered everything. Every scream. Every locked door. Every moment she had begged herself not to disappear. The woman offered her a cup of water. "You're not alone anymore." But Maya knew better. She'd learned that survival wasn't the same as healing. She could leave the physical room. She could walk in the sunlight, talk to strangers, maybe even smile again. But the walls she'd lived behind, those would take longer to tear down. Still, this was a beginning. And beginnings, Maya had learned, often came from the darkest places. As the nurse adjusted her blanket and checked the foreline, Maya closed her eyes not to escape, but to rest, for the first time in years. Months passed. Maya didn't count the days anymore. She didn't measure time by screams, or silences, or the color of bruises. Time was different now, gentler, slower, but still uncertain. Healing, she had learned, didn't follow a straight line. It bled and circled. It whispered and retreated. There were nights she still woke up gasping. Nights where the walls of her small apartment seemed to close in, like they remembered the other room, the real one, the dark one. But every morning, she opened a window. It became her ritual. The first thing she did, no matter how little she'd slept, was pull back the curtain, unlatch the frame, and let the world in. The wind, the light, the sound of distant cars and birds. It reminded her that she wasn't trapped anymore. Her therapist once asked, "Do you believe you're safe now?" Maya didn't answer right away, because safe wasn't a switch. It was a choice. One she had to make every day, despite everything inside her screaming otherwise. "I don't know if I'll ever feel safe," she finally said. "But I feel here. I feel real. That's enough for now." And it was. The man who hurt her was behind bars now, but Maya understood something others didn't. Bars didn't erase memories. Justice didn't restore innocence. But it gave her something else. Space. Space to rebuild, to breathe, to find herself again, not the girl she was, but the woman who rose from the ashes. The room with no windows would always exist, somewhere deep in her, a scar that would never fully fade. But now, she had the key, and every time she opened a window, she took back a little more of what was stolen, one breath at a time.